If tomorrow you were chosen to become one of the first astronauts to set foot on Mars, how would you feel? Probably excited. You are about to become one of the first human beings to walk on another world. Your name will be mentioned alongside Christopher Columbus, Yuri Gagarin, Neil Armstrong, and the people who open new chapters in the history of human exploration. But before you step aboard that spacecraft, I want to ask you one question. Are you truly ready for what awaits you on the journey to the Red Planet? Because this is not a flight that lasts a few days, like the journey humans made to the Moon. Earth and Mars are constantly moving around the Sun, which means the distance between them is always changing. Under favorable conditions, the two planets can be about 56 million kilometers apart. But at other points in their orbits, that distance can stretch to hundreds of millions of kilometers. So a journey to Mars could take around 6 to 9 months each way, and the entire mission could last nearly 3 years. Now, imagine what that journey could do to your body and mind. Because to set foot on Mars, you don't just need a spacecraft capable of getting you there. You need a body capable of surviving the journey. On Earth, gravity is something we rarely think about. Yet every second of our lives, it is shaping us. Every step, every movement, every heartbeat places forces on our bones, muscles, and organs. Over millions of years, the human body evolved around those forces. Then, suddenly, they disappear. Inside a spacecraft bound for Mars, your body enters a world it was never designed for. Your muscles no longer have to support your weight. Your bones no longer feel the constant load of gravity, and the body begins to adapt. But adaptation comes at a cost. The bones in your hips, legs, and spine can lose roughly 1 to 1.5% of their mineral density every month in microgravity. After months in space, your skeleton can become significantly weaker. Your muscles begin to shrink as well, especially the ones in your legs and back. The body simply doesn't have to work as hard anymore. Even your spine changes. Without Earth's constant compression, you can become a few centimeters taller while in space. But perhaps the strangest changes happen above your shoulders. In microgravity, around 2 liters of fluid can shift toward your upper body and head. That can increase pressure around your eyes and affect your vision. On long-duration missions, a large proportion of astronauts experience these effects. And this is only one of the ways space begins to reshape your body. So getting to Mars isn't simply a matter of building a spacecraft powerful enough to reach it. It means keeping your body functional for months in an environment it was never built to survive in. And that raises the real question. What can you do to stop your own body from breaking down? To answer that question, let's look at what happened to Russian doctor Valery Polyakov. In 1994, Polyakov boarded the Mir space station with a special mission to spend long enough in space to test how long the human body could endure the effects of microgravity. Polyakov remained aboard Mir for 437 days, 17 hours, and 58 minutes, nearly 14 months, continuously in space. When the Soyuz spacecraft brought him back to Earth, his body had to face an almost immediate change. After more than a year without having to constantly fight against gravity, his legs had become weak and his sense of balance had been affected. But Polyakov still tried to leave the spacecraft on his own. His first steps on Earth were unsteady. He then sat down in a chair beside the spacecraft. That moment revealed something important. Humans can live in space for a very long time and still retain the ability to return to Earth. But that doesn't mean the body has adapted perfectly. Throughout his 437 days aboard Mir, Polyakov's body was still undergoing changes caused by microgravity. His bones lost density, his muscles weakened. His cardiovascular system had to adapt to no longer constantly working against gravity as it does on Earth. What helped limit these changes was exercise. Every day, he spent hours training with resistance equipment, forcing his muscles and bones to keep bearing loads even when his body weight had almost disappeared. And that is one of the most important lessons from long-duration spaceflight. The human body can adapt, but that adaptation has to be constantly maintained. This could be one of the keys to getting humans to Mars. But what happened to Polyakov was only the beginning. Because on a journey to Mars, you wouldn't have to deal with microgravity alone. You would also have to leave behind the natural shield that has protected humanity throughout its evolution. On Earth, you barely notice it, but in deep space, an invisible threat is always there. Polyakov's record was achieved while he was still inside Earth's protective environment. The Mir space station, like the ISS today, orbited within low Earth orbit, where Earth's magnetic field still deflects much of the charged particle radiation coming from space. But on the way to Mars, you would leave that protection behind, and then you would enter an environment filled with invisible radiation. One of the greatest threats would come from galactic cosmic rays. These are extremely energetic particles, including atomic nuclei, accelerated to enormous speeds by violent events across the galaxy. Some carry enough energy to pass through spacecraft materials and penetrate deep into the human body, damaging cells and DNA along the way. And unlike a short burst of radiation, galactic cosmic rays exposure can continue throughout the entire journey. When a high-energy particle strikes the spacecraft, it can collide with the atoms in the hull and trigger nuclear reactions, producing secondary particles such as neutrons and fragments of atomic nuclei. So simply adding more metal to the spacecraft does not automatically solve the problem. You could build thicker walls, but every additional kilogram has to be launched from Earth and accelerated toward Mars. And some materials can produce more secondary radiation when struck by extremely energetic particles. That is why radiation shielding is such a difficult engineering problem. You don't simply need a wall thick enough to stop the radiation. You need a material that can reduce the radiation without turning the spacecraft into an impossible mass penalty. And the exposure adds up. Over months and years, the radiation dose accumulated during a Mars mission could significantly increase the long-term risks of cancer, tissue damage, and other health problems. So how could you protect yourself? The first answer may come from something you already need to carry: hydrogen-rich materials. Water and materials, such as polyethylene, can provide effective radiation shielding while producing fewer secondary particles than some heavier materials. Instead of adding a massive layer of armor, future spacecraft could place water, food, supplies, and other hydrogen-rich materials around the crew's living quarters. The things keeping you alive could also help protect you from the environment outside. But even physical shielding has limits. That is why researchers are also investigating magnetic shielding. In theory, powerful magnetic fields could bend the paths of charged particles before they reach the spacecraft. It would be a kind of artificial version of the protection provided by Earth's magnetic field. However, this technology is still being researched. Creating a magnetic field strong enough to provide meaningful protection while keeping the system light, reliable, and energy efficient remains a major challenge. With the development of artificial intelligence, technology is changing faster than ever before. It is opening up possibilities that, just a few decades ago, would have seemed like science fiction. Humanity has always been driven by the desire to explore and conquer the unknown. That desire took us across oceans, into uncharted lands, and eventually to the surface of the moon. Perhaps one day, Mars will become part of that story too, a world where humanity can build a second home. But until that day comes, there is one truth we cannot forget. Among the billions of planets in the universe, Earth remains the only place we know for certain that can sustain life. Mars may be the future, but Earth is the present. And rather than simply dreaming of a new world somewhere in the vastness of space, perhaps the most practical thing we can do today is protect the only world that has ever given us a place to call home.